Syria's prime minister survives a bombing in Damascus. Good evening, I'm Mark Martin.
And I'm Wendy Griffith. The bombing is the latest violence in a civil war that has so far killed more than 70,000 people. Opponents of President Bashar Assad say he's used chemical weapons to kill his own citizens.
President Obama warned that would be a red line and a game changer. Now a growing number of lawmakers say he may have to back up his talk.
John Waggy has more in tonight's top story.
For some time now, this gruesome video has been circulating of people the Syrian opposition says were killed by President Assad's chemical weapons. In March, President Obama suggested that if chemical weapons were used, it might push a reluctant U.S. to intervene against the regime.
To use potential weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations crosses another line, and that is going to be a game changer.
Now the U.S. has joined British, French, and Israeli intelligence in saying that Assad forces did use chemical weapons. That prompted this recent exchange at the White House between Press Secretary Jay Carney and ABC's Jonathan Karl.
Jay, did the president mean it when he said use of chemical weapons would be a game changer in Syria?
Yes, he did.
So what does that mean?
The president made clear the use of or the transfer to terrorist groups of chemical weapons by the Assad regime would be crossing a red line. And he retains all options to respond to that.
Military force, including military strikes.
All options.
As distasteful as Assad is to the U.S., the Syrian opposition features a strong presence by al-Qaeda, a decided U.S. enemy. Still, a growing number of lawmakers say the U.S. may need to intervene to help take down Assad, if for no other reason than to remind the world that the U.S. stands by its word.
The fourth thing, if we keep this hands-off approach to Syria, this indecisive action towards Syria, kind of not knowing what we're going to do next, we're going to have a war with Iran, because Iran's going to take our inaction in Syria as meaning we're not serious about their nuclear weapons program.
While the U.S. debates Syria policy, Israel is fortifying the Golan Heights along the Syrian border, a border that has been generally quiet since the last war 40 years ago. It comes as a former Israeli defense minister warns that Syria is funneling chemical weapons to the radical Hezbollah in Lebanon.
We must be ready to be able to fight against radical fundamental activities that will come from Syria, and that's what we're doing here.
John Waggy, CBN News.
And our senior international correspondent, George Thomas, is with us now to talk more about Syria. George, what happens if chemical weapons in Syria get in the hands of al-Qaeda?
That would be not good. I mean, that would really not be good. You know, al-Qaeda has for years talked about acquiring weapons of mass destruction like chemical weapons, a nuclear bomb, for example, taking over the nuclear jewels of Pakistan. But they have said clearly that if they did obtain weapons of mass destruction like chemical weapons, they would definitely use it. But listen, Syria is home to the largest place for chemical weapons in the Middle East, fourth largest in the world, and they have about 1,000 tons of chemical weapons stored in about 50 different places, mainly up in the north. So this is very, very serious. Western intelligence, Arab intelligence are very, very concerned about the potential of this falling into the hands of not just al-Qaeda, but also Hezbollah of Lebanon.
Well, as you know, there's a lot of evidence pointing to the possibility that Syria is using chemical weapons. How would this change the face of this war?
You know, the administration is very cautious because of the situation, the debacle over Iraq and the weapons of mass destruction there, and the assertions that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. The Obama administration is saying, listen, we have to send in the UN investigators. They've got to go in, get the soil samples, verify, double check, make sure all this stuff is true and is verifiable. But obviously it changes the game. You know, I was reading today how one Syrian commander said, listen, don't send us jihadists. We need weapons. The weapons need to go into the hands of the Free Syrian rebels, as well as the other factions that are fighting against Assad.
Well, do you think that we're doing enough to help the rebels? Some say there's really no good guy or bad guy.
That's right. It's very unclear to know. I mean, look, there are factions within the opposition that clearly have links to al-Qaeda. These are guys who fought our forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. They hate Americans, both sides. All the factions that are fighting against the Assad regime do not like the United States. The key is, who do you arm? And that is That's a tough one.
Is the U.S. going to have to get boots on the ground there?
Well, that's something that nobody wants to talk about right now because
Yeah.
the public is very much war fatigued.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, keep us posted.
Thank you.